Hey everybody, welcome to, I almost said welcome back, but no, welcome to the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. This is the official Dungeon Dive podcast, and this is episode 1. And today's topics are, we're going to talk a little bit about why I'm doing a podcast. And then the main topic today is going to be a ranking of the SoulsBorneRingKiro games. Basically, a ranking and discussion on the modern From Software games like Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Sekiro, and Elden Ring, and all of those. So let's get started with the first topic, which is the intro. So why am I doing a podcast? Well, first of all, the podcast for now is just going to be on my YouTube channel. And there are going to be some pictures that you can view while you're listening, or you can just listen to the podcast. And eventually I will be, I'm looking into streaming services, into uploading services, and just trying to decide the best one that'll fit the Dungeon Dive the best. And then it will be available on all of the regular platforms like Apple Music and Spotify and maybe Stitcher. I don't know. We'll see where it's going to go. But for now, it's just kind of like an audio YouTube thing. But so why am I doing a podcast? Well, one of the main reasons why is I am currently working on turning the Dungeon Dive into more of a full-time job. I am now working a day job 3 days a week, part-time. I am going to be devoting 3 days a week to the Dungeon Dive, full 8 to 10, maybe 12-hour days. And then I'm going to be having 1 day off. So I'm going to be working at making more content, better content for the Dungeon Dive, more consistent. And I really want to make this into my full-time job. And to do that, I'm going to need some various streams of revenue in order to pay the bills and have healthcare and all that kind of fun stuff. And so one of the streams of revenue, of course, is going to be the Dungeon Dive Patreon. So if you can support that, please do. Another stream of revenue will be YouTube, and the podcast will be another one. And it's not just for business reasons. There are a number of artistic reasons I want to do a podcast as well. And really that is to kind of focus on overlapping audiences with a broader range of topics. Longtime viewers of the Dungeon Dive will know that I always take kind of a more of a holistic approach to these hobbies, a lot more than I think a lot of other board game channels do. I am interested in the intersectionality of all of the various things that I'm into, such as board games and RPGs, books, literature, music, art, all of those things, including like video games. And so as many of you are aware, when I talk about board games, I often also recommend books in the same video because board games remind me of books. Books remind me of board games. Music might remind me of a movie. A movie might remind me of a video game. A video game incorporates art and music and might remind me of a board game. And there's all these, I'm constantly thinking about how all of my loves, all of my passions, how they all interconnect and how they inform each other. And I want to offer up a broader range of topics. Now, if you do that on YouTube, the algorithm, from what I've read, really hates you. It really wants you to focus on one thing. So even really talking about books on the main channel probably dilutes my place in the YouTube ecosphere somewhat. So I'm going to use the podcast to talk about all kinds of different things, such as music. I want to do some episodes about dungeon synth and heavy metal and just all kinds of cool, weird music genres. Maybe even interviewing some dungeon synth producers. And just talking about music. I want to talk about movies. I'm going to do a ranking of of all the David Lynch movies, because I do talk about David Lynch in my review for Etherfields. I want to interview game designers and game creators. I really want to interview Madeline Hale, the writer of Table Fables. I'm trying to get her on. I'm trying to contact her. So there's a lot of things I want to do that are some more and some less tangentially related to the core focus of the Dungeon Dive. And I really do think that a podcast and basically an audio only avenue to explore those things is the best approach. And I'm really looking forward to doing it. I have about 10 episodes planned with topics. And to get going, I'm going to try to do this once a week and probably release them on Fridays. So stay tuned for that, for the Dungeon Dive Hobbycast. Okay, so let's dive into today's topic, and that is a ranking of the SoulsBorneRingKiro games. Past, it was known as like the Soulsborne games, but then Elden Ring and Sekiro kind of got lumped in. Basically, we're going to be talking about the modern From Software games, from Demon's Souls on. And talking a little bit about each game. I'm going to give my ranking with a kind of a short review or discussion on each of the games and talk about why I love or don't love certain ones or certain aspects of those. Let's talk a little bit in general. So the Dark Souls, the Soulsborne fan community as it stands now, I really don't like. That whole get good crowd is just gross. The community really, I think, started getting just kind of gross after Dark Souls 2, where it attracted this certain kind of like uber power gamer that I'm just not interested in interacting with. And it's been hard of being such a fan of these games and finding kind of like my place in the community that I used to really love, but now I just kind of try to ignore a lot of it. There are still a lot of things around the community that I really love, and a lot of that is like YouTube. The YouTube community for the Souls games is really a special thing, and it is really the thing that got me into participating with YouTube. And the two channels that did that a lot for me were Epic Name Bro and VodiVidya. And those two channels really started this whole kind of like cottage industry of YouTube channels where they dive really deep into the gameplay, the mechanisms, and the lore of these amazing games. And then the third channel that really got me into it is Lobos Jr. and his like challenge runs and all of his playthroughs of all the Souls games, and also Distortion 2, his speed runs. I really, really like. Oh, and Catalyst. Catalyst is also a really good channel on speed runs for the Souls games. But these games are pretty special for the most part. And I think one of the main reasons why they are special is that they refuse to hold the game player's hand. And they kind of scratch an itch that was itched a long time ago by games like the original Metroid games and the original Zelda games. These kind of old, kind of action RPG, action adventure games that were full of mystery and kind of required the players to come together. And this was we called it playground knowledge, where while we were playing the game when we were young kids, we would go on at recess and lunch at school, go to the playground and talk about these games and things that we discovered, because really due to like limitations of the games at the time and the way that games were designed, the games didn't present us, the players, with a lot of information. We were tasked to figure things out on our own. And over time, video games really got away from that, to where the point kind of like where Demon's Souls and Dark Souls came out, games were made kind of, I don't know, they like treated the players like we were dumb. They literally had golden breadcrumb trails pointing us in the direction of where to go. You know, these maps with huge icons and compasses and always telling us exactly where we needed to go in order to find what we needed to find. Modern game designers are really afraid of their players not discovering and not engaging with all of the things they made. And I get that. You spend a lot of time and a lot of money making something. You want the people who are playing it, you want your audience to experience that. Well, From Software really isn't concerned with that. They really don't care if you see all of their game. And that is evident by the fact that a huge portion of Elden Ring, an absolutely massive game, and a large part of Bloodborne, a much smaller game, are entirely optional. You can beat those games without engaging in a huge portion of the game. And From doesn't hold your hand. From doesn't point you in the direction. From doesn't care if you discover that. They want you to discover it on your own. So one of the stupidest things about the community and about just the whole world that has developed around these games is that fans of From Software games these days, they want to know your credentials to be taken seriously when talking about specific games. They want to know how long you've been into From games. How many hours have you invested? You know, have you beaten all of them? Can you do this? Can you do that? There is this really strong level of gatekeeping involved in the community of these games. I've even seen it to where, you know, if a new player does a review for IGN or GameSpot or something for one of these games, and they haven't, devoted years of their life to the Soulsborne games, then the community will often reject their criticism of the game because they're not worthy. They haven't presented worthy enough credentials. They haven't presented their From Software bona fides. It's so dumb, but at the same time, I have to present mine because if I'm going to be talking about these games and going to be taken seriously about these games, I have to present my From Software credentials. So here are my credentials. And am I worthy enough to have a valuable opinion about these games? Well, only you can decide. So we're going to go through my From Software credentials, starting with Kingsfield 2, aka Kingsfield 1 in the United States on the PlayStation 1. I played that game when it came out because we were all starving for Japanese RPGs when the PS1 came out before Final Fantasy VII Unleashed the Floodgates, and I hated it. It was so slow, so boring. I didn't get it, and I only played a few hours and quickly returned it back when Babbage's still had a return policy on video games. Probably the first game that really got me into From Software is Armored Core 1. On the PS1, a really great mech fighting game where you could build a mech. It was basically BattleTech by way of Japanese mech design. BattleTech meets Robotech, Macross, and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely loved Armored Core. I also played Armored Core at least 2 and 3. There were a lot of Armored Core games, and they all kind of blend together in my memory. But I know I played at least a couple also on the PS2. Speaking of mech games, I also played Frame Gride on the Dreamcast. And then I played but never beat Echo Knight Beyond, and that was on the PS2, I believe. Another PS2 From game that I really liked was Adventures of Cookie and Cream, this weird kind of multiplayer, 2-player puzzle platform game. The first 2 games that I really fell in love with from Software were Otogi 1 and Otogi 2 on the Xbox. Those games just blew my mind. I absolutely love them. I still own them. And they were recently made backwards compatible. So if you have an Xbox Series X or S, you can now play Otogis 1 and 2. Highly recommend both of those games. Just great atmospheric, weird worlds and lore. Very simple action games, but highly recommended. Demon Souls, I have beaten many times. Dark Souls 1, I have beaten many times, including the DLC. Dark Souls 2, I have beaten many times, including all of the DLC. Bloodborne, I've beaten a few times, including the DLC. Dark Souls 3, I beat the main game a few times, but I never beat the DLC. We'll talk a little bit about why. Sekiro, I never finished. And Elden Ring, I probably won't finish. So just hearing that really brief discussion on the Soulsborne games there might give you some indication as to how I am going to rank them. All right, so let's get to the ranking. So this ranking is going to go from my least favorite to my favorite. And so let's just get to it. So coming in at my least favorite is Dark Souls 3. So Dark Souls 3, I find the world and the level design and the lore to just be really dull and kind of boring. The game itself, without using much sequence breaking, it's super linear, and the levels are really just kind of mostly just kind of flat surfaces without a lot of verticality. The world just seems kind of like stretched out in an uninteresting way. I also found that the final boss was really boring. There's almost like no design at all to him. It's so video gamey. The final boss is kind of like this conglomeration of all of the different powers and builds that the players might have built, and it seems like something that you might have found in an old Nintendo game. I don't mean Nintendo design, I mean something like on the old Nintendo Entertainment System. There are a lot of really kind of lazy fan service callback moments to Dark Souls 1. A lot of the times, like the best things in Dark Souls 3 are just like, hey, remember this character you liked in Dark Souls 1? Well, here's his armor. Or remember this character you liked in Dark Souls 1? Well, here's a character who's kind of just like him. Or remember that music that you liked at the end of Dark Souls 1? Well, here it is again. It's just for me, the world felt really lazy. And the fact that it pretty much ignores the really cool things that Dark Souls 2 did, especially in the narrative department. The best story that From has ever made by far in Dark Souls 2. And Dark Souls 3 really ignores that. And it felt like the developers were subscribing to this, in my opinion, totally wrong fan opinion that Dark Souls 2 sucked. And they basically ignored Dark Souls 2 for the most part. And Dark Souls 2 really developed the lore of Dark Souls 1 in a really interesting way. I found that most of the boss designs in Dark Souls 3 were either boring or too difficult, with too many phases and there's huge health pools and multiple health bars. The DLC upped the difficulty so much that I was physically unable to finish it. I'm not a very good game player, and I don't have the hand-eye coordination, the reflexes, the speed needed to beat the Dark Souls 3 DLC. And so that kind of like starts my falling out of love with the Souls games, is the Dark Souls 3 DLC. I just found it way too difficult. They really embraced the get good crowd, and I feel like they just started making things more difficult just to make them difficult, and kind of forgot why the games were so special in the first place. It wasn't the difficulty, it was the mystery, it was the obtuseness, and they really embraced that get good or stop playing crowd, and it left me with a sour taste in my mouth. There are a few things I really do like though. I really do love the fight with the Nameless King. It is absolutely metal, totally cool, great environment, and just that boss looks so cool. And that whole dragon shrine area is gorgeous. Easily my favorite part of the entire game. I also like the descent into the caverns below the lake. I like games where you descend into subterranean depths, especially when you keep going deeper than you thought you would. Really a great feeling. Those two levels were fantastic. I beat the game with multiple characters, but by the time I was approaching the end with each of my main characters, I started to feel kind of bored with the game. So coming in next after Dark Souls 3 is Sekiro. Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. So I love the theme of Sekiro. I love the atmosphere and the world. I just don't like the gameplay. In my games that I have saved, I am at I think there are 4 different endings, and I think I'm at 3 different endings. I'm at the bosses of each of them, and I cannot beat them. I'm just too slow and not good enough. Sekiro completely surpassed my ability to play the game. They fully embraced the get good crowd for this one and made the games really, really challenging, and more challenging than I was able to muster up the skill to be. And so I found the game just really frustrating. I also miss my favorite part of the Souls games is the fashion Souls, is getting all kinds of new weapons and new armor and combining them in different ways and creating different builds, using magic or melee or using shields or shieldless. And that's really gone in Sekiro. Sekiro mainly, it really does force the player to play a certain way, and that's okay. I mean, that's how the game is. That's what the game is. And really, it's kind of like this weird kind of really fast-paced, twitchy rhythm game. And it's just not something that I'm really interested in. I really did miss experimenting with different weapons and play styles. But there is some things I really loved about it. I love the world and the lore, and some of the level design is really fantastic, especially that whole path through Ashina Castle where you veer off to the side and you go into the forest with the corrupted monks. I love that whole path. That whole spoke on the narrative wheel is really engaging, really interesting, and totally just kind of hits that part of my mind that is into martial arts movies. I really like that a lot. I'm just not good enough at the game to have any fun. And that first weekend when I had the game, I took 4 or 5 days off from work to play it. And I spent most of that time just frustrated and almost breaking controllers. And that was when I realized that my hand-eye coordination, my reflexes were no longer able to keep up with the demands. So coming in after Sekiro, and this is the one that is going to make a lot of people mad, and that is Elden Ring. So Elden Ring, I probably won't finish Elden Ring for much of the same reason why I never finished the DLC for Dark Souls 3, and I never finished Sekiro. And that was just because the game is too hard for me to have fun with. I find it way more frustrating than I do fun. I've put about 100 hours into Elden Ring with 2 different characters. I have about 60 hours with a sorcerer build and about 40 hours with a melee build. And combined in that 100 hours, I would say probably the last 40 hours, I have not been having any fun at all. I can no longer keep up with the demands that the bosses require to beat. And I don't like to summon in these games. I don't like to summon help, really. I like to do things on my own, especially that first time through. And I literally just, I can't do it. And I've spent so many hours at this game just really frustrated, and I'm really disappointed. I wish I was good enough or fast enough to really get into this game and enjoy it. I'm not a big fan of the open world. I find that it doesn't really add to the experience. It kind of takes away from the experience, and it kind of takes away from the thing that I think From is so good at, and that is really intricate level design. So what Elden Ring is it kind of takes the different levels in a game like Demon Souls and then spreads them out in a massive map and connects those levels with open overland that you have to traverse. And that sounds cool, but for the most part, what what I found is that the open world just wasn't very interesting to me. There wasn't a lot to discover in terms of a living, breathing world. The open world doesn't feel like a world where people live their lives. I know that's a weird thing to say, but there are no like villages with citizens. There aren't things that I would expect to see in an entire world. And so I found this kind of like this weird kind of disconnect. I wanted to race to get to the set pieces, and the set pieces are actually pretty good. Like some of the legacy dungeons are fantastic. There is a city that you explore, two cities that you explore, but one that I really liked was this like the capital city up in this northern region. And it has one of the coolest dungeons that I think From has ever made. What is it called? Like Subterranean Shaming Grounds, I think it is. Just a fantastic, evocative name. But it felt like it was straight out of Demon's Souls. This level was so good, and that entire level is well designed, and I really like that. But there's a lot of the surrounding area I just felt kind of boring. There's a lot of times in the open world where I would explore and explore and explore and finally make it to like an item. And I would pick up an item, and all it would be was like a kind of a lame little crafting item. It never really enticed me to go off the beaten path too much. Because everything is so spread out, it just takes forever to explore, and the rewards just weren't exciting enough to get me to care. I felt like the enemies had too much health, too much hyper armor, making them hard to stagger. Again, I think a lot of this just comes down with this, to me, just not being a good enough gamer to have fun with this game. I uninstalled it multiple times in frustration, and I have finally uninstalled it for good after I've made it to the snowy mountain region. So that was Elden Ring. And now we're getting to the games I love, okay? So there are things with Elden Ring, there are things with Dark Souls 3, there are things with Sekiro that I do like and I admire. Most of my dislike for those games just comes, it just lies in the fact that I'm just not good enough to engage them on the level that they need to be engaged on. I can't meet their demands. The rest of these games, I can meet their demands, and so I have more fun. And these are really hard to put in an order, but I've done so, starting with Demon's Souls. So from level to level, I think this is like the best levels that From has ever designed. It's also very segmented, and I actually like this segmentation. It's so segmented that people call the levels in a similar way that they call like the Mario levels, a 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, 3-1, 3-2, etc. It has this kind of Mario, very video game-like feel to the structure. I think the level highlights include an area called the Tower of Latria, and the first two areas of that, called the Prison of Hope and Upper Latria, are just, oh man, they are masterfully designed. So spooky, so much tension and atmosphere, and just gross. I'm really glad that games don't have a smelling factor, because I would hate to smell Upper Latria. Stonefang Tunnel 1, called the Smithing Grounds. It's just an absolutely massive level. The levels from like checkpoint to checkpoint in Demon's Souls are just huge, and they're so intimidating, especially this Smithing Grounds. The Shrine of Storms and the Ritual Path. I think these are Worlds 4, with these skeletons, these like that roll at you, and these flying manta rays. Just really, really interesting, kind of this weird Yes-like covers, these weird kind of like new agey album cover of a level design. Really great atmosphere. And I actually really do love the world that a lot of people hate, and that is the Valley of Defilement. I mean, this is like straight, if you made a video game of Morkborg, it would basically be the Valley of Defilement. It's so utterly dark and bleak. It's pure oppression. The bosses in the game are super creative, and even though they're really easy, I think they're fun to fight. All of them except for a Flame Lurker. Flame Lurker is easily the most challenging boss in the game, and it is funny to think back that he was once like one of the hardest bosses in modern gaming. And now he's actually probably easier than even the easiest boss in Elden Ring and Sekiro. The Nexus, the hub world, is totally moody. I love the monumentals, these weird like monk-like things who are so weirdly designed that I can't tell if they're oddly half-bodied creatures or are they sitting down with giant heads. I don't know. They're really weird. They creep me out. I love them. And that whole area, the vastness of the Nexus, the emptiness, and with the haunting music that plays, just creates this really kind of ominous tension and mood. The entire game is simply overflowing with atmosphere, and I love it. So that was Demon Souls. Next up is Dark Souls, and this is the first of the Souls games I played, and I think it's the best overall world that From has made. I will never forget that interconnected nature. I will never forget when I first discovered that shortcut elevator that leads from the Undead Parish back to Firelink Shrine. That absolutely blew my mind when I realized how intricately designed the levels were, the different pieces of the maps were. The first part of the first main level that you should go to is the Undead Burg. And this level is as well designed as Mario 1-1 and anything in Half-Life 2. I think it's up there in like the top 5 all-time great video game levels in how it teaches you how to play the game. And the fact that you should go there from the beginning of the game, but there are other places that you can go, it has this great open feel to it without being an open world. Another thing I will never forget is that descent through the depths into Blighttown. And it is such an overwhelming and harrowing experience. I'll never forget, it was on this cold, rainy October Saturday when I was playing the game, working my way through the depths. I finally beat the Gaping Dragon boss. And then I kept hearing rumors about this place called Blighttown. And I finally unlocked the door to Blighttown after making my way through the depths. And then I just had to go lower and lower. I was like, how far down into this world, into this hell am I going to go? And Blighttown is this weird shanty town that's built on like the side of a great scaling wall or a cliffside. And it's inhabited by these gross creatures who are like full of plague and toxin. And I just kept descending further and further and further down. And when I finally made it to the bottom, I was in this poisonous swamp and just feeling this great kind of just oppression over me, like physically over me. I felt the dread. I felt the despair that my character must have been going through. And then I pointed the camera up and I realized at that moment that I was actually outside, and that never dawned on me before. And I saw at the very top of these huge walls the blue sky, and I saw this tree that I could see from Firelink Shrine, which was like my sanctuary, my safe place. And that little spark of blue sky and just being able to see my safe place, my home, my sanctuary, filled me, the player, with a sense of hope and of joy and of knowing that I was going to, at some point, get back to that place. And I have never had a video game fill me, the player, with that kind of feeling before. It was it was such a great moment. The reason that it's not higher on the list is because I do think that the game kind of falls apart in how it's designed about halfway through the game, not counting the DLC. After you get this item called the Lord Vessel, and you go to like the end game, you can tell that they were rushed, that they weren't really able to put a lot of time and effort into some of the remaining levels, and it just the game just kind of gets a little less fun after that. But the DLC that they released later in the Prepare to Die edition is fantastic, and it's some of the best content in the whole game. But the places like the Demon Ruins and especially Lost Izalith areas are super disappointing. So it is a game that gets less good as you play through it. But there are so many highlights, like New Londo Ruins, the fight with Sif, this great duel with this like massive sword-wielding dog, Sin's Fortress, this death trap dungeon, all of the loot, the catacombs and the armor. It's a really fantastic game. All right, so coming up, the penultimate entry, and here's the one where people are really going to start hating me and cursing me, and that is Dark Souls 2. I love Dark Souls 2, but that wasn't always the case. At first, I was one of the haters. I was in the Dark Souls 2 sucks echo chamber, and it just felt so different than Dark Souls 1. You could tell that it was from a different team, and the game felt more like a weird sequel to Kingsfield than it did a sequel to Dark Souls. It was very slow. It was a little clunky. Your characters started out really weak. The world was disjointed, and it didn't make a lot of sense at first. But as you play it, things start to come together, and that's because of the narrative. It's because of what the game is about. It's also, I think, the only Dark Souls game that actually progressively gets better as you play through it. The levels and the design gets more interesting as the game goes on. But the whole game is about memory, and about how memory is untrustworthy. It's about how people forget, about how they are forced to forget through old age, by nature or over time. The disjointed nature of the world starts to make sense because it mirrors the idea that our character and that we the players, that our memories can't be trusted. You know, how far have we traveled and for what purpose? We start to forget distances. Things that were once on the horizon are now in behind us. Things that were above are now below. And we can't trust our memory in the game. The game itself tells us at the beginning of the game that by the time we reach our destination, by the time we reach the finality of the game, we will have forgotten our very purpose. We won't know why we seek the throne in this game. And it's this just really interesting and weird meta level that the game is working on. The game is also absolutely overflowing with content. There are so many builds, so many different ways to create your characters because there are so many weapons, so much armor, and so many spells. The number of different ways to play the game and to create your character is like almost unlimited. And then there's the DLC. Just absolutely, this is the way that games need to do DLC. This is the gold standard of modern expansion packs. The Crown of the Sunken King, the first DLC, is probably the single best area that From has ever made. It plays and feels like an old D&D module brought to video game life. You have the areas are Shulva, the Sanctum City, the Dragon's Sanctum, and the Dragon's Rest. These areas are just so expertly designed with creative enemies, traps, puzzles, mood, and atmosphere. And it's also really the only Souls game, maybe Elden Ring does this, I don't know, but actually changes at New Game Plus by adding in more items, more lore, and changes to the enemies. I also found the connections to Dark Souls 1 far more nuanced and meaningful and interesting than the fan service-y connections between Dark Souls 3 and 1. The world of Dark Souls 2 is a palimpsest. It is a kingdom built upon kingdoms built upon kingdoms. with vestiges of each protruding through into the next, both physically and metaphysically. It's a game that I think is actually about something, and I love it, and I still play it to this day. And finally, my favorite of the modern From Software games, and the last game that we're going to talk about today, is Bloodborne. As much as I love Dark Souls 2, there is Bloodborne, which is towering over it. What can I say about Bloodborne that hasn't been said 1,000 times? It is, for me, the perfect level of challenge. It almost gets too hard with the DLC bosses, but I was able to overcome and beat everything in the game. First, there is the theme, the world, and the lore. It's so utterly complex and interesting. It moves from this weird kind of like Victorian horror where you think it's going to be about maybe Frankenstein monsters and werewolves into the realms of cosmic horror and weird fiction. And it ends up being one of the better works of modern cosmic horror. It deals with the very nature of life, of birth, and of humanity's place among the creatures and beasts of the cosmos. The whole theme of blood, of menses, of literal period blood is actually a thing in this game, and it's treated with respect, and it's treated with a sense of reverence and mystery. The whole game revolves around cycles, around periods controlled by the moon, and how those periods and those cycles influence the blood of women, the blood of men, and the blood of beasts. And then there are the trick weapons. These are like the greatest weapons in all of video games. While there aren't a ton of weapons in the game, there's a couple dozen, I think around 26 or so. Each weapon is basically an entirely different kind of build. The weapons are these complex mechanisms that change shape and form and have different moves and different powers. My favorite weapons are the boom hammer, which is like this old style hammer that has like a hammer that you cock back like a gun, and when you slam it down on the ground, it creates this giant explosion. The tonitrus, which is this mace that your character shakes and it builds up like static electricity. And then there's the Kirk hammer, which is a long sword that you shove into the sheath of a giant hammer. And oh man, I love all of the weapons in this game. And the fashion souls, the armor, is just off the charts. There are so many cool cloaks and hats, trench coats, boots, and gloves in this game. You can make your character just look so badass in Bloodborne. And just the levels themselves are so well designed. They twist and turn into these like maze-like pathways through urban and wilderness areas. I'll never forget my time making my way through this like snake-infested forest and stumbling upon these weird aliens, and then moving through this cavern and discovering this long ladder that brought me back to the clinic of the beginning of the game. And then it started to dawn on me what was actually happening, what the clinic was doing, what these doctors, what these priests, these clerics, what they were doing to the people of Yharnam City. And they're packed with these great elder ones, these elder beings and these aliens, and the experimentation on the blood of men and women and what was going on, and just the stakes of everything was so high. And just what a fantastic game. The way madness is portrayed, the way that we have to deal with like these mystical eyes of the cosmos. The game is totally cosmic, and there's just really nothing like it. So that is my ranking of the modern From Software games. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first episode of the Bloodborne of the Dungeon Dive podcast. And coming up, we're going to have some episodes about podcasts. We're going to have some episodes about some movies, an episode about some dungeon synth, and a whole bunch of other things that I've planned. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Take it easy. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.